Hey, good Saturday morning to you. This is Timo. It's a dreary day out there today, but you know what? Hey, not every day is gonna be great, and the plants could use it. So I'm still gonna have a good day, anyways. Today I wanted to talk about, as I'm doing a series here on YouTube about the albums that have inspired me and have taken me on the musical journey that I have been on since I was a young kid. And today, this one is by Michael Bloomfield, and this is a retrospective, including unreleased material. I got this. I think I got this down at Cheapo Records. It's been a long time. Cost me $14, and it was $14 well spent. And you know, been Mike is just, he's mostly a blues guitarist. He come out of that Chicago scene, along with Paul Butterfield and Nick Gravenides. And you know, these white kids were like walking into these bars in Chicago where Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf were playing up on stage, and you know, it was all black, clubs back in the day, and it's like these guys had balls, and mostly Butterfield, Bloomfield would kind of follow Butterfield in there, but Paul was a friggin' maniac, and these blues giants would see these kids and they could play. I mean, Butterfield on harmonica and Bloomfield on guitar, that was quite a friggin' duo. And they went on to, the Butterfield Blues Band, which was just fantastic. And then Mike went on to play with the Electric Flag, did movie soundtracks for the Trip, which was a movie way back there. But Mike was born on July 28th, 1943, and unfortunately he died on February 15th, 1981, of a drug overdose. And drugs were a big part of Mike's life, but it was also, he was a chronic insomniac. The guy couldn't sleep. He walked off the Super Session album with Al Kooper, and that's why they had to bring Steven Stills in, because he just like woke up one day. They laid down that first side, which was excellent, and the guy would be walking the streets. He was just an insomniac, or just up all night for days, and the heroin and the drugs he was taking seemed to kind of combat that, but also, as we know with these drugs, they were destroying him. And, he just up and left the session. So, that second side, Steven Stills came in and played guitar for that. But, he was, he first became popular in music in the 60s. And he played on Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. Dylan himself has said, Mike could play anything. And he wasn't, his love was for the blues. But, he was like, you could form him into anything. And he could play with Bob Dylan, which at that time was going electric, and the folk music, and turning music, especially on that folk scene side, upside down. And Mike was a big part of that, and Al Kooper, and he was born in Chicago to a wealthy Jewish family. His father, his name was Harold. He was born in 1914, and Harold's father, Samuel, started industries in the 1930s. And after Samuel's death, Harold and his brother Daniel inherited the company. Bloomfield's mother, Dorothy Klein, was born in Chicago in 1918 and married Harold in 1940, and she came from an artistic musical family and worked as an actress and model before marrying. So, Mike was born into some money, but, the thing about it, he just had such a natural talent. And by the 60s, like I said, with Paul Butterfield and Alvin Bishop, who played kind of like second guitar in that first incarnation of the band, because Mike was just the lead man, and after Mike left, Alvin ended up taking over. But he was really tight with Nick Gravenides, who actually went into the Electric Flag, and he played with he did that song "Buried Alive" with the Blues, a Janis Joplin song that she died before she could ever put vocals on it, so they kind of left it as an instrumental. But Nick Gravenides, took the words that were actually to it and made a he did a really good version of it. But they were good friends, and they met at the University of Chicago, and they just had a love for blues. Big Joe Williams. And in '63, Bloomfield, he started showcasing, you know, um, he was showcasing his guitar around Chicago. He was playing on the streets. There's pictures of him and Nick Gravenides just playing outside of stores, and when he went in with Paul Butterfield, and they started to really make a rise. And really, they were like the American blues band. I mean, all the Mayall, all these bands, Clapton with Mayall, Peter Green, these were all English guitarists, but Paul and Mike really, like, they were like the American version of this. And those albums are just fantastic, They really are. You could put them suckers on, and they're just great. Mark Knopfler was on them. Sam Lay on drums, and Jerome Arnold on bass, and just really, really great stuff, And Mike, to me, is just, I love his playing. He's just such a great player. I mean, when I was young, it was the Jimmy Pages and Jimi Hendrixes, and those are still, you can't deny those guys. Those guys were fantastic. But Mike, he just was, he was just something else, man. He really was. And this is the gatefold, and there's a great, writing up on him and everything about the scene. It's really a fantastic album. And here's the back, with Mike in good spirits, and he was like one of the first, like, guitar heroes that came out, as I said, on the American side. And he was well respected, he was a well respected guitarist within his peers, within the system. And he kind of brought that, like with the Electric Flag, that horn based, band style, like that Blood, Sweat and Tears and Chicago would take on and take to another level. But that first album by Mike, that's what he wanted incorporated. He wanted to have like a big band style, him playing guitar, but everybody featured. And that was a great band. It truly was. It's a great album. The only thing is, heroin was all over the place, and there was several guys in that band that were doing heroin, and like most people that that drug comes into contact with, it destroys you, and it destroys your ambitions. It destroys your that first, like, inspiration to go into this stuff just kind of takes over, man. And he was in the Electric Flag from 67 to 68. It was a very short-lived band, but a long time coming. That 68 album on Columbia Records was just fantastic. And then, going on to, actually it wasn't Blonde on Blonde, going on to Highway 61 with Dylan, and playing on that. And that was, that was a groundbreaking album. And playing with Buddy, with Barry Goldberg, and and Buddy Miles. I mean, just great musicians. And mostly all of those guys that I'm talking about are gone now. I mean, they lived that way. Al Cooper's still around. He used to live right in Somerville when I was living there. I met him one time down in Davis Square. I knew it was him. I could see him. And then I went to see him when the Paul Butterfield documentary came out, and he was there afterwards at the Regent Theater taking questions. So, those guys were really a big part of the music scene. And, Mike's solo work, he made some, off and on albums. Like I said, he was hooked to heroin. So, his work was scattered, but really when you dig into his catalog, or into his work, he was a fantastic musician and a fantastic guitarist. And at one point, he was, the heroin got so bad for him, he just gave it up. He just was like, I don't want to play no more. I can't do it no more. And it was B.B. King that kind of said, hey, don't waste your talent, because B.B. could see in this guy and so many others just what a talent he was. And he was like, please, Mike, don't give this up. And Mike came back, and in the end, unfortunately, he was playing on like, porno, 70s pornographic soundtracks, and it just, his star was fading, and it's sad. But like I said, when you go back and you listen to some of that stuff, it was some really fantastic work. And Mike, for the stuff that he did do in his early days, it still holds. It still holds up today to me. And this, if you can find this album, or you can find anything like a retrospective, or if you're a streamer, go on Spotify and just go through his catalog, and you'll be amazed at just how fantastic a guitarist this guy was. And it's a shame that he died in San Francisco on February 15th, 1981. He was found seated behind the wheel of his car with the doors locked. And according to the police at the time, there was an empty Valium bottle that was found on the seat, but there was no suicide note. And the medical examiner who performed the autopsy ruled that the death was an accidental overdose. And it was he was shooting cocaine and methamphetamine, and it just poisoned him. It just poisoned his body. Between, you do that stuff for a long period of time, and he was doing it throughout the, from the late 60s into the 70s, and obviously into the 80s. And it does a number to your body, man. And it was just such a shame, But his last album was called Cruising for a Bruisin'. It was released on the day of his death, the day that he died, that it was announced that he had died. That album came out, and Mike was buried in a crypt at Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in Culver City, near Los Angeles. And he was a cat, he died out there. He made it big in California, but he was a Chicago guy. And sometimes these guys, they lived hard lives, they really did. But Mike's influences were like Scotty Moore, playing on those old Elvis albums, and Chuck Berry, who kind of like set everybody off, with that rock and roll. And Chuck is still considered like the king of rock and roll, and Little Richard, who came out, when you hear, that stuff's so old now, and some people might not appreciate it, but when that stuff hit the air, Little Richard, like some of the stuff, he was saying on there, we're gonna ball all night and stuff. That stuff back then you just didn't say, and it was just rocking, and of course B.B. King, he got that smooth style of playing which you can hear in there, but Mike made it his own style. And, Big Joe Williams, they were friends. He loved his playing. And Big Joe was, got messed up too, the booze and everything. But, they used to hang around together. He was a huge Otis Rush fan. Loved Otis's playing, Albert King, Freddie King, and even, the late, great Ray Charles. So if you can find this album, it's worth, it's worth getting to, like, really, because it's got all the, it's got the stuff from the Newport Folk Festival with Paul Butterfield, born in Chicago. I've got my mojo working. The second side's got a bunch of stuff from the Electric Flag. Side 3 is Michael and Al Cooper, the Super Session stuff, and then side 4 is with, actually, Mike also played with John Hammond and made an album with him, and with Dr. John on it. And that's a good album too. That got overlooked. But if you listen to that stuff now, that's some good stuff. So anyways, I wish you all a good day. Mike is a huge influence in my guitar playing and in my life. And I hope that he never gets forgotten, because that would be a shame. He was such a talent, such a great guitar player, and such a musical part of the scene back then. And he should always be remembered as one of the greats. So have a great day all, and be well.